right now I would like to introduce Steve Jarrett, Vice President of VitaLearn.
Good morning. I am your logistics man this morning. First, I need to note the fire exits. Dynamic Landscapes website. Oh, as you probably know, our sub-theme this year is going green, and we've, instead of handing out the workshop pamphlets, everything's electronic today. So hopefully you're taking advantage of that. Thursday's schedule. Today's keynote will go till 9:30, then session 1 from 9:45, 10:45, session 2A, or lunch, 11 to 12, session 2B, or lunch, 12:15 to 1:15. All right. Session 3, 1:30 to 2:30, closing session 2:45, 3:15, and door prizes at 3:15. We will be out of here promptly at 3:30. Session locations, 1, 2A, 2B, and 3 are in the gym, Joyce Hall, auditorium, global business, and technology. And there's a campus map online if you need to, refer to that. Evaluations and certificates. So, again, this year, you will receive an email at the end of the day with a link to today's or evening's evaluation. At the end of the evaluation will be a link for you to download your certificate of attendance for the day. We learned that you probably, when you do that, make sure you're beside a printer to print the certificate. Otherwise, you have to go through the whole survey again. Somebody did that already. I can see it. Lunch. If you're eating in a cafeteria, pick 2A or 2B to eat. Boxed lunch are for attendees who would rather attend a session than take time out for lunch in the cafeteria. If you have requested a boxed lunch, regular or veggie, you will pick them up immediately after session 1 at 10:45. Now, this is important. You can't switch. If you said you're going to do the cafeteria, you got to do the cafeteria. If you said you're doing a boxed lunch, you got to do the boxed lunch. We're not allowed to switch. If you said you're going to get a meat sandwich instead of a veggie, please don't take a veggie sandwich, because we're limited, and people who want to not eat meat get upset when there aren't any veggies left. So please, pick the one that you have on your tag in your little pouch. Next. Oh, Champlain College has asked, do not bring your boxed lunch into the cafeteria. I don't know why, but just don't do it, all right? Do not bring your boxed lunch to the cafeteria. Tickets are located at the back of your name tag. The cafeteria is upstairs in the building we are in right now. It's a great cafeteria. How many people have never used the cafeteria here? Anybody? Here's the deal. There's not one line, there's like 3 lines. So if you see a line, you can go to other lines. There's a pizza line, there's like a fast food line, there's the quality line, there's a salad bar line. So just meander about and pick what you like. Good. If you need internet access, all right? Student, not Champlain student, but student. There shouldn't be any password protection to it. Also, if you want to share comments or collaborate, share photos, you can do it via Twitter with a hashtag of VTED, or use the VitaLearn Google Plus community. Door prizes. Everyone who is registered is already in the door prize boxes. Members of the boards of VitaLearn and VSLA are not eligible. You must be present to win. Oh, last thing, Champlain College is going green, makes significant strides toward reducing their waste, and they're asking for your help. When disposing of something, please pay attention to the signs and labels to determine if the item belongs in the compost, recycling, or trash. All right, at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Lucy de la Briere to introduce her friend and colleague, Today's keynote, Steve Hargadon.
Thank you. I met Steve as a colleague several years ago when he and I blogged together for Google's Infinite Thinking Machine blog. I soon found out he was much more than a writer, as I helped him year after year unpack and set up huge open source labs at ISTE's National Conference so that other educators could understand the importance and power of open source in education. He has blogged, he speaks, he consults on all types of educational technology issues. He runs several virtual and physical events. He builds communities and connections that have over 100,000 people in them. So he pioneers the use of social networking in education. He's created Classroom 2.0, which some of you may have joined. He is the director of Web 2.0 Labs, the host of Future Education Interview Series. He's the chair of Social Learning Summit, the Learning 2.0 Conference, the annual Global Education and Library 2.0 Conference, all conferences and social networks that you can participate in for free. He is an amazing writer, he's an amazing doer, but mostly he's an amazing thinker and listener. And those thinking and listening skills have brought him to interview over 350 people on important topics about technology and education. And he's just an amazing person, and I'm so glad that he was able to end his around-the-world trip, which he just came back from Paris, to Vermont, and come and work with us today at this session and this afternoon at the Project Ignite speakers, where he'll be sparking some important conversations. I welcome you to Vermont, Steve Hargadon.
Thanks, Lucy. So I have two quick questions. The first is, I'd like to wander around, but I know you're filming. How much latitude do I have from moving on the stage? Any latitude? What about going down on the floor? Okay, thank you. The second thing is, I saw a bunch of students come in. Where are you? I'm going to invite you to come sit in the front. There's a part of the presentation I'm going to have fun asking you some questions about, and it will make me feel good to see you up close. So there are seats down here. Feel free to come up front. You can still tweet and Facebook or whatever your teachers say you're allowed to do. Okay, so this is the Education Network is the Learning Revolution. And I'm not sure if Lucy made this title up or I did, but I really liked it. And I've had some fun kind of putting this together, and I hope that we'll have a good conversation here. This is pretty one way, right? I mean, I'm going to have you do a couple of things where you'll participate, but the truth is we don't have the time, you're not going to feel comfortable really having a conversation, but I'm here during the day. So let's talk about this, because I think these are really important issues. And I also have been told that they're very strict here about time, so that I have to finish on time. So if we don't get to something, come see me. So I'm a believer in conversations. Hargadon is an Irish name. I actually discovered the family farm in Ireland 2 summers ago. It was a thrill. I met living relatives. Many who are Irish claim Irish descent, many more than actually live in Ireland. But there's a saying in Ireland that goes, oh, I don't need this. Am I still good? It was kind of a security blanket. So there's a saying in Ireland that, how will I know what I'm thinking until I hear myself say it? And I don't know about you, but I will often in conversation say something and then write it down, because it was in the conversation, the dialogue with someone else, that I thought of something I hadn't thought of before. I think this is really important. I think that we are remembering, by virtue of the web, the value of conversation as a part of learning, because the web in and of itself is a huge conversation. So this is the Future of Education interview series. Ira and Pam are here. They've both been guests on the show. They're delightful. And this has really been fun for me, because these interviews are conversations, or they're my own form of learning. And typically there's often a book associated with the interview, so I get to read the book, and then I'm interviewing the author. And my learning is so substantially higher in this conversation than it would be if I just read the book. So as a part of this interview series, I didn't look to put Pam and Ira in here, but well, you're in there, I'm sure. I interviewed this man. So this is John Taylor Gatto. Does anybody know this name? Some of you do. So in 1990, John Taylor Gatto had been New York City Teacher of the Year for 3 years in a row, New York State Teacher of the Year for 2 years in a row, and he sort of publicly quit. On the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal, I think, he said, "I think I'm harming students more than I'm helping them." Okay, so I had him on my interview series maybe a year and a half ago, and he's a very talkative man. So the interviews are typically an hour. We really try and keep them to an hour. He talked for 2.5 hours. But what was interesting was to see the degree to which a message from 23 years ago, which had been very radical, he became sort of one of the heroes of the homeschool movement, that message of his is now somewhat mainstream, right? And basically he argued that the factory model of schooling was broken, that schools had been set up under a certain set of sort of premises for how students were going to go through them, and that was no longer a valid way of a lens through which to look at education. Okay, well, I realize all these conversations I'm having, people are saying pretty much the same thing. It's 23 years later, but it's the same kind of message. And I thought something has shifted, right? Our relationship with technology, our changes in our culture have changed how we view this story. And we're more willing to say that we don't think the factory model of schooling is as good a model as it was when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, that's what I was told. Be seen and not heard. Don't ask dumb questions. Those were pretty consistent messages to me. So he wrote a book called Dumbing Us Down, and then several others, including a history of education in the United States, which is fascinating. But this growing consensus, I realized there was this growing consensus that we feel in some way that our education system is broken. Right? And so if it's broken, the question is, what's the new narrative? If the factory model narrative for education doesn't give us the footing that we need, then what's the new narrative? How do we describe what happens in education? So that's our challenge for today. And what I hope to describe is a narrative that's making sense for me in terms of teaching and learning. So I want you to turn to your neighbor now. You have about 60 seconds, so share 30 seconds each. And what do you think our new narratives for learning are or should be? And share with each other, just back and forth. You have 60 seconds, go. Okay, so how did you do? Did you learn anything? Just in 60 seconds of conversation? I saw nodding heads, I saw shaking heads. There was certainly a fair amount of conversation going on. Okay, my thesis would be that we're going through a huge and significant change in our human culture. A change that rivals the printing press in terms of its impact. And that as a part of that, the technology is driving those changes, and those cultural changes are going to drive our education changes. How we think about education will be driven by the changes in our culture. And I want to make that argument today, that this isn't airtight, right? But the technology shifts the culture, and the culture then shifts our expectations for teaching and learning. So here's the orderly view of the change that we're going to go through. Right, this is from a book called Rethinking Education in the Age of Technology, right? And so we had the apprenticeship era of education. The parents were responsible, the content was practical, it was apprenticeship driven, the assessment was observation, it took place at home. Right? And then we moved through the Industrial Revolution into universal schooling, right, where the state was responsible, the expectation was success, the content was disciplinary knowledge, the assessment was testing, and it took place at school. And the argument would be that we're now going to move to this lifelong learning model, right, in a very methodical fashion, just as this was from here to here, right? So very smoothly we're going to go from here to here, where the individuals and the parents are going to be responsible, the expectation is individual choice, you're learning how to learn, the assessment is embedded and it takes place anywhere. I don't think that that's how we actually view this change. Here's how I think we view the change. This is a tidal wave. Some of us are down on the beach and we're looking at the buildings and we don't even know the wave is coming, right? Some of us are down on the beach, we're looking at the wave and we're like, oh, I'm 2 years from retirement. I'm getting out, right? And then there are some who are up here on the wave who are not only surfing, but they're tweeting while they're doing so, and they're saying, I'm surfing the wave, and isn't this exciting? And hey, down there, you could do this too. And people are like, how? How could I possibly do this? Okay, so let's use this lens now. Here are 3 technology shifts that I want to argue are significantly impacting the culture and then our view of education. The first is social networking. Social networks are a fascinating form of conversation. They're really built around conversation. This is what we call the Bloggers Cafe at the ISTE conference. How many of you have been to a conference and come home and thought, I learned more in the hallway than I did in the sessions, right? So that's what a social network largely is. It's those kinds of conversations that have taken place in the hallway versus this kind of transmission. And I think this is really, really interesting, in large part because of how widely it's been adopted. So first we had blogs, and they allowed us to be a part of the conversation. Anybody here ever start a blog? Okay, those of you who are still blogging, keep your hands up. So that's not bad. That's a pretty decent size. I'd say you were about 40% in this room. Blogs were chronological. They required that you set them up. They are, in some ways, a little bit frustrating, right? Because you can blog something brilliant 2 months ago and it just sort of disappears from view. But it was the first chance we really had sort of for free to be in the conversation. Right? And I remember 6 or 7 years ago when there were maybe 100 or 120 educational bloggers. And it was a sort of a fairly tight community. And it was really exciting every time anybody posted anything. Now, I don't even know my own children's most recent post. There's just so much. Okay, after blogs came wikis. Who here is an active wiki creator? Intriguingly, wikis were sort of a step up in terms of technology from blogs. They allowed for multiple people to edit a single site. They allowed you to put material in different places. In terms of what the potential, wikis were arguably more valuable than blogs, but they didn't really take hold. Way fewer of you are actually actively using wikis. I remember creating my first wiki, and it took me several days. Part of it was just the courage, and then there was the coding. Do you remember the coding you had to do? And even now, it just doesn't feel that smooth. Okay, so then came social networking. So we had about half of you, a little less than half of you blogging. We had a very small number of you sort of actively using wikis. How many of you are using social networking in some form? You're on Facebook, you're using Twitter. Okay, that's really darn close to ubiquity. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand if they're not in a social network. But there's something that Clay Shirky talks about that happened when email became ubiquitous, when you were pretty much sure that anybody you met was going to have email. There's an interesting thing that's happening with social networking, which is I was in India in a school for children of a leprosy colony working for a week. This was sort of like this lifetime dream we'd had as a family to go there. And they don't have cell phones, and kids don't have access to the internet. And for the talent show, what did they do? They sang a Justin Bieber song and did all of the dance moves. And then they did the Gangnam Style perfectly. And I was stunned. I mean, how did you learn this? Well, some of the visitors have cell phones, and we watched it. And I thought, this is really phenomenally interesting, the degree to which the ubiquity changes things, right? So the world is now this giant social network. And we want to say it's a learning network. And it is a learning network because every interaction, every conversation I have is learning. Learning doesn't only take place when I'm using colored pencils taking notes in a classroom, right? We learn all of the time. And we are now in this giant learning network all over the world. And these kids are learning dance moves. Okay, well, their teachers were really upset. The Indian teachers, they were trying to quiet them. They didn't want the other kids clapping. And I thought, no, this is brilliant, because they really had learned all of it. So Facebook's coy about their numbers, right? I think they're waiting to surpass India or China, right? And there are questions about who, how many active users they really have. But the truth is, Facebook's getting pretty darn close to having more users than any country in the world in terms of population. So we also went to Nepal, and my daughter had lived in Nepal for a year as a gap year before college, and I had gone to visit her 2 years ago. And she said Nepal is different now than it was 2 years ago. Because the kids who are on Facebook in Nepal are more like a kid on Facebook in Florida than they are necessarily the kid in the village. So there's this interesting shift, cultural shift, right, that we want to figure out in terms of what's its learning impact. But it's obviously a huge shift. So Classroom 2.0 is dwarfed by Facebook, but 75,000 members in Classroom 2.0 from 193 countries. That's a lot of sharing and learning together in ways that we just couldn't have imagined a couple of years ago. This is the stats for Classroom 2.0's visitors for one quarter. And it's pretty amazing, the different cultures people are coming to share teaching and learning practices with each other. So we've got global learning networks now. Anybody here talk to somebody in another country within the last week, either by Skype or some other means? When I was in high school, I lived in Brazil for a year on an exchange program. I called home twice because it was so expensive. And now we're starting to get used to actually communicating with people from other countries almost real time. Changes that would have been taken months to get transmitted from one country and their practices to another now happen in a matter of hours, sometimes minutes, especially with Twitter. This is one of my favorite stories. This is Ann Merchant. This isn't Ann, but this is her class. And she has this, she teaches at a small rural college in Australia. And if you see pictures of her kids, through the windows in the background, there are cows in the schoolyard. I mean, this is a small rural school. And she brings students in from, she brings people in from all over the world to interact with their students. And in this case, she brought the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in. And then she invited the rest of the world to come in as a part of this same session. This is now sort of stunningly available to us, right? This ability to connect globally. We run the Global Education Conference. It's 5 days, 24 hours a day. We have about 500 sessions of teachers teaching other teachers. It's in November. It's globaleducationconference.com. It is free. And this is just an amazing sharing of information amongst people from very different places who discover all of these similarities that they have. Okay, so our third shift here, personal mobility. This picture I have to update about every 3 months. This is dated now, right? But my handheld device, which costs less than $500, let's say, has the capabilities beyond the $3,000 to $5,000 laptop I used to buy 7 or 8 years ago, right? So we have this incredible mobility with our devices. The Dick Tracy watch, the Star Trek Communicator, these are now realities for us. These were sort of human dreams, right? In these images, we pictured what was possible. This idea that we could actually talk to somebody from our wristwatch. Well, we don't know if Google or Apple are actually coming out with a watch version, but they don't need to because my phone does it quite well. So my wife and daughter are in Italy. My I was here, I had just arrived, I was in Costco yesterday, right? And we did a Google Hangout with 4 people in the middle of Costco talking to each other. And that's now feels kind of normal. The Star Trek Communicator. My phone has an app that emulates the Star Trek Communicator. This is the answer to the lawsuits about the tablet between Apple and Samsung. Does anybody recognize this? What's that? Next Generation. Yeah, I don't know which Star Trek this was. Was it Next Generation? A real Trekkie here, right? But of course the tablet didn't come out of nowhere. We had imagined this. We dreamed of this capability that you could walk around the Starship Enterprise, and was it the Enterprise in Next Gen? Right, and you could see what was going on with the ship and communicate. Right, this personal mobility has been a dream. So these 3 technology shifts are ones that I want to focus on in terms of this conversation today about the technology driving the culture, driving education. So social networking, global connectivity, and personal mobility. I think these are really dramatically shifting what's taking place in our culture. Here are the culture shifts. The first is participation. So I made a pilgrimage to Powell's Books in Portland. Anybody know Powell's Books? If you're a book lover, right? Used bookstore. So it was my dream always to go to Powell's. So I went and stayed about 15 minutes. I'm totally spoiled now, because when I go to Amazon and I look at a book, I can actually see the reviews of other people who've read the book to tell me whether or not it was valuable to them, if there was a different book that they liked. In Powell's, I would pull a book out of the shelf. There were lots of great books. I had no idea, there was no context for me. I couldn't tell if it was a good book, if people had liked it, if it was a seminal work, or it was something that somebody had just thrown together. It was really, really hard to discern. Because now, in this culture of participation, I learn from other people about the books that I want to buy. And then I share in the same way. I don't go to a restaurant anymore without looking up the online reviews. Right? In the same way, I feel like it's just a gamble if I don't know what other people have thought. And now these services and other services like them have become a part of our culture. And it is a culture of participation. It's sharing with each other things of value. The phrase Web 2.0 was used to define a difference between certain kinds of software on the web and other kinds of software. And it was the software that had survived the dot-com bust. And what they discovered was that it was the software that didn't provide the service or the information, but it was the software that was the framework for other users to communicate with each other. Right? So Web 2.0 services were basically the framework for people to share with each other. And those were the software services that survived the dot-com bust. Which means that we're now part of this great conversation, the conversation in the history of the world in terms of great ideas. Right? Politics, religion, education. These are things that we all care about that we can now participate in online. And increasingly, more and more of us are doing so. In participation, we move from being passive to being active, and we move from consuming to creating. And these are fairly dramatic and important shifts. We're also seeing peer professional development. Has anybody been to an ed camp? Right? Or been to one of our online conferences where teachers are sharing with other teachers? Part of this participation is now becoming sort of the standard way in which we think about professional development, which is learning from each other, which has always been the case, but the technology now has magnified that. These are, in addition to the Global Education Conference, we did one last year called the Learning 2.0 Conference that was just brilliant in the middle of Connected Educator Month. We have the annual Future of Libraries Conference, at the Social Learning Summit. We did a School Leadership Summit. These events are all ways for practitioners to come together and to participate in the building of teaching and learning structures. Number 2 is we have a culture of creation. Okay, so where are my students? Do you recognize this picture? What is it? Instagram. What makes Instagram so great?
Maybe posting pictures and then
Yeah, so you take a photograph and then you post it and share it and they respond. Do they like it? Yeah. They can like it or not. My daughter has this down to an art form. How many times a day she can post in order to get the maximum number of likes. And she'll have a competition with me and we'll take the picture of the same thing and then post and see who gets more likes. Right? But what's interesting is when I was your age, I loved photography, but I would take very few photographs because there was such a high cost to it. You'd put the film in the camera, 24 exposure, 36 exposure, you'd take the photos. You really had to be careful because then you went down and you paid for them. And it was very hard to be a creator and to get feedback. Well, Instagram has sort of radically changed that. There's this process of creation and feedback. Now, sometimes it's not fun that people don't like your photo, right? But it's also kind of thrilling when lots of people do. And that's an act of public creation that I don't know that I really had growing up. I'm sure that the kids in the drama group had it. I'm sure the kids on the student newspaper had it, but I didn't really have it. Unless I'd taken photos and done some kind of an exhibit, which I never did. It was sort of a private interest of mine. But my kids take more photographs in a single day than I probably took in all of my teenage years. One daughter who takes pictures of herself leaping on a bed, 300 photographs to get the exact right pose. Right? I could never have done that. This is my friend Kevin. Kevin has amyloidosis. It's a blood disorder where proteins are deposited in your organs. Typically, it's a terminal diagnosis because when you learn that you have it, you're well past the stage at which you can be treated. In Kevin's case, it only deposited in his heart. So one of the first people ever, he received a heart transplant as an amyloidosis patient. I didn't know Kevin. He lived about a block and a half away, but I heard about him. I called and said, Kevin, sometimes it helps people to create a blog so they don't have to tell a lot of people about what they're doing in the hospital. You don't know me, but I know how to do this, and if you need help, I'd be glad to do it. He called me the night before going to the Mayo Clinic. We set up his blog, kevinandbarbie.com. He's a physician, so he knows the language and he knows medications. But as a patient, he became the authority on heart transplants for people with amyloidosis. People from all over the world read his blog and have made decisions on their medical care based on Kevin's blogging from his bedroom on a free service. I have a skin condition called vitiligo. It's the Michael Jackson skin disorder. You'll notice most of the pigment in my face is gone. He actually did have vitiligo. He was weird in many other ways, but he did have this skin condition. I, in one evening, set up a social network for people with vitiligo. It's now the world's largest social network for people with vitiligo. It's become the meeting place for 3 or 4 large worldwide organizations who've decided to use this as their form of communication with their members. I set this up in one evening in 2 or 3 hours. This is a fascinating change, right? There's no way I would have my child create a resume right now, right? Because there's nothing close to a website in a resume, the kind of information that can be communicated or an e-portfolio. This is my daughter, Anna. She graduated as a theater major from college. Every parent's dream, right? The theater major, knock 'em dead, okay? Anna is gifted. She does theater for children with autism. She graduated from college with 3 job offers. She got a grant to build theater programs for children with autism. She now does a play called Life, Love, and Autism. It's a one-woman play where she takes on 6 personas from research of how people react differently to having a child with autism. This is brilliant. I could not have done this. Number 3 is a culture of sharing. So you know this. As educators, the famous Thomas Jefferson quote that I can light your candle with mine and I don't lose any of my own light, but the room brightens, right? You're all about sharing. And intriguingly now, the culture has become a culture of sharing on the web, right? We have Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. Anybody here still not using Wikipedia? That's not fair because that puts you in an awkward position to have to raise your hand. But if I had asked that question 3 years ago, a significant number of people would have said, I still am very troubled by Wikipedia. Right? But now I think we see it within context. We understand it's an imperfect place, but it has an incredible amount of information. And I go to Wikipedia several times a day. From watching a movie and looking it up, to looking up something on a book, to trying to figure out what John Dewey would have said about what John Holt said. Wikipedia has become this amazing place, and it's a culture of sharing. We have Creative Commons. We have a licensing system now for sharing. 4 is a culture of engagement. Okay, so I'm not a gamer, right? I know people who are. I know people who really love gaming, massive multiplayer online games. I haven't done it, but I can understand what's going on. The scaffolding of learning, the opportunity to interact with others, the opportunity to take responsibility and to do things. I don't even know the language to describe this, but I was reading a book about engagement, and it had this graph, and I thought, this is incredible. Personal, social, and structural ways in which we engage, motivation and ability. This is from a book called Change Anything. It's a group that does sort of wide-scale cultural changes. We don't have time to get into it, but intriguingly, gaming touches every single quadrant here that they identified for how people get engaged and motivated. Right? We have personal motivation, personal mastery from personal ability. We have peers involved in the gaming experience. We have peers helping us to learn in those experiences. We have structural rewards built into the games, and then we have structural tools and resources. This is really interesting to me, and what it reminded me of, or what it helped me to see sort of clearly, was that our children are used to engaging in a way that is much more proactive than my sort of passive engagement, if it even could have been called engagement as a teenager. And I'm not a good example necessarily, and I don't want to paint myself as some wallflower who never did anything. But the truth is, I spend a lot of my time not doing things. The age at which my children are now, where they're proactively engaged, and they expect it. And we can map and model onto this, and we can say, yeah, these are good pedagogical practices. The awkwardness is that the students now expect that level of engagement, and that feels weird to us, those of us who didn't demand it when we were the same age. Okay, so culture shifts. We have participation, creation, sharing, and engagement. And again, the model is the technology shifts lead to culture shifts, and the culture shifts then lead to education shifts. So let's talk about what these mean in terms of education. And are we getting closer to language or thoughts that are helping us to understand how to describe a new learning model, right? To have the conversation of what we think teaching and learning are about, the lens through which, if the factory model is broken, what's the new lens through which we see teaching and learning? What's our new narrative? Here's some clues from what we've talked about so far. From an information culture to a conversation culture, from recipients to participants, from passive to active, from compliant to engaged, from protecting to sharing, from tethered to mobile, from isolated to networked, from local to global. We haven't talked about this yet, it's coming up. From top-down to grassroots, from mass markets to the long tail, from compliance to what? If compliance was the factory model narrative, then what's our new narrative? Because, what's that? Good, I like it. Okay, autonomous. So here are some education shifts that I would like to propose. 1 is breadth and depth, 2 is direction, 3 is inclusion, and 4 is agency. Breadth and depth. So this is the long tail. This is a power law curve that describes a change in demand, right? So this is Justin Bieber selling an incredible number of songs, right? And this is that band that my daughter drives 3 hours to go to that has 15 people in the audience, right? So you reach a certain amount of demand, and in our retail model, once you'd reach that demand, there was enough profit to produce, to distribute, to manufacture, to distribute, to warehouse, and then to retail sell that product. Well, about a year and a half ago, Amazon announced that they now sell more product that doesn't make the retail store than does. Meaning in aggregate, product that would never have made it to the retail shop now sells more in volume than the head of the tail. Okay, what's the significance of this? For me, this is breadth, right? All of a sudden, my daughter can do theater for children with autism and find enough of an audience of interest to make that her life's pursuit. What was our old model? Okay, go to work for somebody, work for 15 or 20 years, build up enough seniority to actually propose a project that might be different and get accepted, look for funding, and then you create. And you may or may not actually be able to fulfill your life's passion in that way. If more than half of the product Amazon sells is in here, then arguably more and more of our economy is going to be in here. What are the skills that students need in this portion of the economy? We're going to work for a large company, you're going to learn sort of traditional management skills. What are the skills in here? Entrepreneurial, willing to fail, willing to try things, brainstorming, about things that we feel a little bit are fuzzy and hard to quantify, and we're not even sure really how they fit into learning. But this is the story of breadth, right? Entrepreneurship, self-employment, freelance, micro work. The majority of people in the United States now work in what's categorized as a small business. So I think intriguingly, there is a message here in terms of what we should be thinking about in teaching and learning. Again, we talked about Kevin, right? Kevin represents depth. So there's the breadth, and then there's the depth within that breadth, right? So it's finding something that may not have been a common job before, and then being able to dive deeply into it. So how much are we thinking about that in terms of education? The ability to have content and depth trump, to have the depth trump the standard content. More important for someone to learn how to go deeply than to memorize the things that are going to be on the test. Well, that raises all kinds of awkward questions for us, right? Because we know what the expectations are, and probably personally we have mixed feelings about it. Well, you should know what the capital of Montana is, right? But if we're really thinking about what's happening in the world and where the internet is taking us and where the culture is taking us, the breadth and depth become significantly important. My Vitiligo Friends Network, Anna's network. Number 2 is direction. Right, so this is traditionally how we've thought the direction of activities goes. You have an institutional idea, you plan that idea, you market that idea, you incentivize, and then you get participation. So professional development pretty much fell into this category, right? This is what we're going to do. We're going to create a plan for it. We're going to market it to you, send out memos, encourage you to go. If you don't want to go, we're going to make sure that you have time, paid time to do it, or whatever it is. We're going to create an incentive for you to do it, and then you come and participate. Well, part of what the web is doing is that it's shifting that model, the direction in which things take place. Right? So the top-down direction becomes a bottom-up direction. So it starts with the personal. I make a personal choice to go to a website for people with vitiligo. I make a personal choice to join a group on the web. And whatever my interest is, whether it's sharks or the Ozarks or it's surfing, right? I go and make that individual choice to participate on the web, and that aggregates into public areas. So people who are interested in sharks, and people who are interested in surfing, or people who are interested in biking or in vitiligo, and they create communities. And those communities then actually perform civic functions, right, where they do things that are beyond tangible rewards, like Wikipedia, where the contribution is beyond just the group, but it goes to the world as a whole. Here's what's interesting to me about this. The institutional idea and the community look very similar. So Wikipedia looks a lot like Encyclopedia Britannica at a surface level. But in fact, they're created in completely different ways. Right? And we're used to thinking about teaching and learning from a top-down model. When in fact, we can make the argument that part of what we're seeing, this shift here, is from top-down to bottom-up. So kids are finding something they're interested in, that guitar piece that they go on YouTube and they learn how to do, and then they record it and somebody else records it back. These are individual choices that aggregate up rather than top-down mandates. The third is inclusion. So to your neighbor now, take another 60 seconds, and I want you to share something that is important to you. A deep interest, a hobby, a skill, or a talent. Turn to your neighbor and share something you really care about. Okay. It's no fun to cut this off. I know you want to keep talking. Please feel free to continue that conversation. I know it's not fun to cut that particular conversation off. Why? Why is that a hard conversation to cut off? Because it's personal. I asked you to think about something you care deeply about, right? There's this sense of sharing something that's really important to you. This, for me, is at the heart of inclusion. It's understanding that people are going to have very different experiences in their lives. They're going to respond to very different kinds of things. In the adult world, we're really comfortable with this, right? I have vitiligo. I create a network for people with vitiligo. Whatever my interests are, I volunteer for a particular group. But in the student world, we don't have that same sense of inclusion or inclusiveness around different capabilities, different interests, and different ideas. We have mixed feelings about this because we have this expectation that if you are a student, you should just be compliant. Right?
That works.
Yes. Hey, I'm a parent of 4 children. I know the temptation of that shortcut. Right? Because there are times when I just have to say, you just have to do it my way. But in my heart, I know that's not actually healthy for my children. So part of what I think is happening here is that the technology change the culture, and one of the things in that culture change is that many of us are undergoing a personal cognitive revolution. That excitement that you just experienced sharing something with somebody else, we've started feeling that same excitement every day in the work that we do. All of a sudden, we're sharing and we're excited and we're working with people globally. And it's not an exaggeration for me to say that this is what my brain has felt like when I started actually participating in social media and blogging and doing interviews. It felt like all of a sudden I was actually using more of my brain. So here's my first pass at a new narrative for teaching and learning. Is to help unleash individual energy and potential. Now, saying it just makes me think, well, that can't be new. That's not novel, right? How is that different? But the truth is, this was never a part of the education system that I really grew up in for me. It wasn't about me, it was about the system. That's my 10-minute mark. Okay, so for me, this becomes a part of the narrative, right? Helping unleash individual energy and potential. It's like there's a dam that's holding back the capacity. Right? Why would we think that any child is not valuable? Our son had significant learning difficulties in 4th grade. So we took him to one of these places that test them and try to determine what their problems are. And they came back with a report and said, here are David's deficiencies. And I said, wow. I said, so kids who have these troubles, what do they end up being good at? No, you don't understand, Mr. Hargadon. These are deficiencies. There is no compensating value. These are things he has to fix. And that was the moment at which I realized that's not a model I can use with my child. And it's not true. It was tempting to believe it. But it's not true because David was brilliant and he was sad and he was depressed. And it wasn't until he took a job selling pest control one summer at age 19 and made $25,000 in one summer that he realized he was actually capable of doing something. He was really, really good at door-to-door sales. Who knew? I could never do it. I could never have done that. but he's really good with people, and he has a friendly smile, and he's thoughtful, and he doesn't hurry, and he takes his time. Now, whoa, wait a minute. He's not deficient. He's just different. So the final one for me is agency. So agency I would describe as the ability to act for oneself. So there are different definitions for agency. I'm using agency in the sense of my ability to make a decision about my own life and future. And I think agency is a critical part of this story for us now in education. Right? So I was at Google, I saw the self-driving car. Right? I'm sure they just have people whose job it is just to show visitors the self-driving car. Right? But for me, it was really fun. Okay? For me, this became a way of thinking about students, right? Our ultimate goal should be that they're self-directing. They're self-driving. Our goal should be that they walk out of those doors at the end of whatever period of time that we have shepherded them, and they feel confident that they can move forward in their life and make decisions for themselves, and they're capable. And I got to tell you, I think for most kids in this country, that is not what happens when they graduate from high school. And for many, even when they graduate from college. And I think we have to be very explicit about this. I think we have to say that self-direction and agency are critical, and they have to be our goal. It cannot be our goal that they are always following someone else's direction, because most of them aren't going to live in that head of the tail world, the head of the curve world, where they can just listen to somebody else give instruction. They have to be in a place where they can actually make decisions for themselves. And when that becomes our goal, the self-direction or the agency of students, then we are going to treat them differently, and we're going to respect the differences, and we're going to look for ways to help them succeed, and we're going to look for ways to unleash their individual potential. So breadth and depth, the direction of change, inclusion, and agency. And again, so the technology, my thesis here, the technology shifts the culture, and the culture is shifting our perceptions of what should happen in education. So I think education is going to continue to change pretty dramatically. I'm really interested in the degree to which small colleges are able to respond differently than large universities. I think it's going to give them an incredible edge in terms of shifting how they do things. I'm interested in what schools can change and what dynamics they have and where teachers are involved in those changes. But in this world of a giant learning network, honestly, how well are we preparing students? Are we preparing them to walk out into this world that I have just described? I hope in some cases, yes. But my sense is that we have to start forming this narrative fast enough to really make a difference, right? And honestly, how prepared are we? When you saw that picture of the tidal wave, did you say, I'm in that retiree group? Yeah, I'm on the beach. I'm on the beach. Right? How ready are we? So I want to give you a challenge. How do we create and support learners in this new world? So you saw where the exit doors are, right? Okay. What else happens on an airplane that we all know in our minds the wording for? In case of an emergency, an oxygen mask will descend from the compartment above you, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. What did you just say? Yes, place yours on before assisting your child. I've always assumed that was because if you die, you can't help the child. If you don't get that oxygen mask on, you're not going to get the air. You're not any good to a child if you die. I read, and I wish I could remember where, that that's not actually the case. It's that children are really reluctant to put something on that they haven't seen you put on first. So it's a case of modeling. That the important piece here is modeling. So my first challenge to you is you. It's really fun to talk about how the world is changing. It's really exciting to say this is what students need. This is a case of me, we, you first. We have to do it. We can't model it if we're not doing it. We can't understand its power if we're not doing it. For many, this is the choir, right? A lot of you are doing this. But it still can be scary, right? Because education has been about finding fault and critiquing, right? And the moment you put finger to keypad and you're typing something that's going to go up and it may have a grammatical error or it may be something you regret saying 5 years from now, fear grips us. and we sometimes stop. And we don't do what we know we want our students and children to do. We're not brave, we're not bold, we're not believing in our own capabilities and our own values, and we're not willing to take a risk. So the first message is it has to be you first. This person's not related to me, but it was a Creative Commons open picture, so I could use it. But I remember the best advice I ever got as a parent was, if you want your kids to be readers, let them see you reading. And that's an incredibly important thing for us to remember, that education is about relationships, and it's about a social influence. And most of us can tie something back in our lives where someone made a difference for us, and it was because of a relationship and influence. And it wasn't because of a standardized test, and it wasn't because of cramming a particular amount of information into getting ready for a week of testing. Right? It was somebody who trusted us, or saw potential in us, or took time with us, or modeled for us, right? Who was such an active and engaged learner that we wanted to become like them. Propaganda is the use of psychological and emotional means to gain an outcome. Influence is making a difference in someone's life. We have to be careful that we're not using propaganda. We're not manipulating. We have to respect the agency of students and help them make the choice to be learners and not force them to be learners. Because propaganda was at the heart of some of the worst things that were done in World War I and World War II, and are actually, in my view, at the heart of a lot of the reasons that we're having difficulties right now in our culture, because of an expectation that we can be manipulated. So, I want you to be the lead learner and the lead networker, and here's your action list in all of 2 minutes. 1, that excitement you felt as you talked about your passion and interests, rediscover that. Make sure your students know what it is. Find ways to express it. Your influence as a passionate learner is, in my view, the most important difference that you can make for students. Number 2 is build your personal learning network. You're doing it. You're here. You're meeting people, you're online, you're all in social media in some form. But this global network is really, really powerful. Number 3, start building a personal web presence. This one's going to challenge a lot of you. If we think that the portfolio is better than the resume, if we think it's really important for students like my daughter to put up a site on Theater for Kids with Autism, and that becomes a part of her opportunities in her life, then my question to you is, have you built a personal website for yourself? Have you learned the value of it, and are you modeling it? And again, I know this is hard. This may be the biggest challenge for some of you, but I would say this is really important. It's important to understand the power of this, because there's something you care about where you can even just be a curator. You can just have a list of links to these things. There's something that you care about where you're posting that and identifying that you're curating it for other people will make a difference for them and for you. And finally, become a part of the conversation. There are great conversations going on right now, all over the world, online, in all kinds of venues. And there's something really important for us as human beings to be a part of the conversations and to learn from them and to engage in that way. Thank you very much.